To Spirit Reports of Life After Life, based on the book of Heaven and Hell by Allan Kardec. We have been discussing the happy spirit so far, and we started off at looking at what it means to transition. We know we all do, and some of us do have a little fear about it. And so we looked at what we can do today to prepare ourselves to get away with the fear of our transition and how we can actually assist our passing by doing something right now. And I'm wondering, dear friends, do you remember what that was? We learned, before I answer this question, I want to say further, we learned that it is the soul that feels pain during the process of the physical form falling off. And we also learned that there is such a thing as a state of confusion, which often starts already before the transition, continues during the transition, and most often happens after the transition. It is a state that the soul experiences as painful, where the soul does not really know where it is, why it is where it is it alive or not. So what can we do, dear friends, right now to prepare ourselves to shorten or annul the state of confusion? It is our inner transformation. When we start working on our inner transformation today, we will help not only our transition, but our current life. We help undoing past wrongs from previous lives, and we plant happy seeds for our future life, both in spirit as well as in our next incarnation. So before we continue, I want to summarize a little bit of what we've done in the last 4 or 5 weeks. So what we learned is our inner transformation is very vital for us to prepare for an easier transition with less pain, which means we are dematerializing our lives. We also learned from the various happy spirits who had a fairly easy transition with no to almost none in terms of state of confusion. So they taught us that we should love our enemies. They also taught us to have courage in the face of adversity. They asked us to be resigned to the vicissitudes of life. We learned that resignation is the surrender of the heart. We also learned that we do need to forgive, that this is part of practicing charity that they reminded us to do, to practice always charity, which we know was defined by the spirits on high as benevolence towards all, indulgence towards the imperfection of others, and forgiveness. And then they also recommended to us to practice charity, the kind of charity that is benevolence. And we learned that benevolence is linked to the root. The word is linked to Latin and means bene, which means good, and volere or volens means will, goodwill towards all, even our supposed enemies. And then we also learned that we do need to educate ourselves, because by knowing the different steps of our transition and what actually happens, that will make it further easier as well. And then we learned that we need to feel blessed when we experience hardship, because we're reminded of one of the Beatitudes that Jesus brought to us on the Sermon on the Sermon of the Mount, during the Sermon on the Mount, and that is, blessed are the afflicted. Because at that moment when we experience affliction, we are blessed because we have the opportunity granted by the goodness of God to undo some past wrongs. And then we were told to follow God's laws. And we learned that in the 3rd part of the Spirit's book, we have a beautiful list elaborated through many questions to the spirits on high by Allan Kardec, which describe and list all the divine laws that we fall under. And then lastly, we were asked to practice the good. And practicing the good, always we're reminded of chapter 10 of Thought and Life by the Spirit Emmanuel through Chico Xavier, who recommended to us to feel the good, to visualize the good, to speak the good, and to mold the good with all the resources we have, which is a very strong statement, which means ultimately we need to practice the good always, every minute of the day. All right, good, dear friends, that is the summary of what we've learned so far, and we're excited to see what's new today. But before we do that, I'm going to quickly look and see who has joined us. I see a number of nice friends here. There's Teresa Castro. Welcome, dear friend. Lovely to have you. And there's Renata Casadei. So beautiful. Thank you for being here, Renata. And there's Nora Brazil. Thank you, Nora, for your presence and support. And Teresa is saying, sunshine, you're reflecting light off frames of glasses. Yes, I've seen that. And the next thing I will do is adjust the light. Thank you so much. Isn't it crazy that the glasses are like a mirror, right? I apologize. I'll adjust it in a second. Nora Brazil says, hello, dear friend. And I'm saying, hello, dear friend Nora. Nice to see you. And Victoria Baker, thanks for joining. Hello, my mom passed on July 4th. I'm grateful for this lesson. I pray her transition was beautiful. Oh, yes, Victoria. We are praying for her good transition as well. And I'm glad you're joining because there's so much good information for us here to understand other people's passing and, of course, prepare for our own. So thank you so much. And then let me adjust my glasses just a second. So let me know whether it's still happening. It might be better. We're hoping it's better. So thanks again, Teresa. So now we are going to heaven and hell. We are in the second part. We're still looking at happy spirits. And today we are going to discuss the case of widow Foulon, née Wollis. And you can find her, if you like to follow along, on page 273 in Heaven and Hell. Widow Foulon. So Mrs. Foulon died in Antibes on February 3rd, 1865. And she lived in Le Havre. Le Havre is north and east of Paris. There she earned the reputation as a skillful miniature painter. I think it might still be reflecting, right? Let me know, friends. So she earned a reputation as a skillful miniature painter. So she did miniature paintings. Her noteworthy talent at first served her only as an enjoyable distraction. Later, however, when she was beset with bad days, she learned to take advantage of her craft as a precious resource. What made her especially beloved and esteemed, what made her memory so dear to all who knew her, was her amiable nature and her personal qualities. So, dear friends, so far we're learning that she was a skilled miniature painter and she was a very amiable person, very kind. This is good so we understand who she actually was. She took the sentiment of the good very seriously and she did not flaunt her qualities. So she practiced being humble, which is another quality that we like to enhance in ourselves. Perhaps she wasn't even aware of her qualities. So she was a humble person. If there was ever anyone who did not allow herself to be dominated by selfishness, it was undoubtedly this woman. So she was not selfish. And we know that selfishness and pride is the antidote to charity. She was always ready to sacrifice her repose, her health, and her own interests for people for whom she could be useful. From her youth onward, her life had been a long series of sacrifices, as well as harsh trials, in the face of which her courage resignation, and perseverance never faltered. So let us pause, dear friends. From the description, we can see that this widow was a pretty remarkable person. She was humble, she was practicing the good, she was giving, she was the opposite of selfish. She seemed to use her time very wisely in doing the good. And then she says, we learn that she also applied courage, resignation, and perseverance during her harsh trials during her life. So courage. First, in chapter 9 of the Gospel, we learned about resignation, which is the surrender of the heart. But let us pause and look at courage a little bit further. We're reminded of the book that we all listen to, or most of us, because Vanessa offered to us this beautiful study group on Jesus in the Home by Neil Lucio. And there is one chapter in there which is chapter 27, and it is called The Forgotten Gift. And we can find it on page 103 if you like to look at it, or maybe earmark it for later when you can read it, because we won't read the whole story, but I want to summarize it. So we're talking about courage right now, and there is a chapter called The Forgotten Gift. Now we can gather, we can guess that the forgotten gift is courage, correct? So what happened is, Jesus and the disciples met at Simon Peter's house, and Jesus told them a story about a man who had gotten permission from on high to ask the angel of giving for some gifts in his life. So he had earned the merit to be allowed to ask for some gifts. Now let us see what this man asked for. First, he asked for the blessing of youth. But very soon he learned that would entail strength and beauty more than what he wanted to afford. So he quickly went back to the angel of blessings and asked now to be wealthy. And of course, that gift was granted to him. And he realized that a lot of people who didn't have any money now extended envy towards him. And he didn't like that. So now he went back to the angel of blessings, and he asked to receive authority. And once he had authority and he was all powerful and mighty, he realized that authority generates hatred and rebelliousness in those who don't have authority. So he was very disillusioned, and now he asked for intelligence. So he was a restless fellow, right? He wasn't happy with what he got, because he realized that every gift he received had a challenge built into it. So now he received intelligence, and that did not please him either. So then he found comfort in finding a wife and building a beautiful home and family. And then what happened? Death visited him, and his wife died. So now he asked for the gift of health. And he enjoyed health for quite a while until he aged, and he realized that he nevertheless was getting older, and he didn't like that. So then he sat back and realized that everything he had been asking for wasn't really fulfilling, making him happy, so to speak. And he realized that in his quest for happiness, he had forgotten about the most precious thing, the gift of courage. Courage produces enthusiasm and good spirits with which to carry out the work that is needed each and every day. This is what he learned. He saw that the forgotten gift, the most important of them all, was courage, because courage was giving him enthusiasm to get through his life, and helped him to surround himself with good spirits who would help him to get through the challenges of life. So he knew that youth is beautiful, wealth is pleasing, freedom is admirable, power is brilliant, intelligence is respectable, And a blissful marriage is holy. Physical health is blessed. But if people do not have courage, nothing works out. That is the most important gift. So now we're going back to heaven and hell, and to widow Foulon. And we're reminded that she told us that she had courage, resignation, and perseverance that helped her through her life. So she had a very important and wise approach to life that we want to take to heart. And we could ask ourselves right now the question of how much courage do we have in our lives? Friends, I'm going to move the light a little bit further because I'm seeing that it's still reflecting. I hope it finally is settled now. All right, so how much courage do we have in our lives? Are we making use of the gift of courage? So it is helpful to kind of feel the lessons, right? We need to feel them, apply them into our lives so we know where we need to do a little more work. So courage. So let us reflect about that during the course of the week, whether we have courage. So we continue on. So after a long time of doing her little paintings and all the challenges of her life, she ends up losing her eyesight. So now, let us see. So now, Mrs. Foulon comes across Spiritism. She studies it ardently. And in Spiritism, through Spiritism, she finds consolation. It helps her with the lack of her vision and other challenges in her life. So now we learn one more thing. Mrs. Foulon was a Spiritist. And now about her death. Her death was as dignified as her life. By the way, if you want to follow along, we're on page 274 in Heaven and Hell. So her death was as dignified as her life. So we see, dear friends, that when we live a dignified life where we practice the virtues and follow God's laws, then our transition will mirror the course of our lives, the life choices we have made. So her death was dignified. For her, it was a deliverance from earthly ties that would open to her the spiritual and blessed way with which she had identified herself by studying Spiritism. So Spiritism helped her. She died in peace, for she was aware of having fulfilled the mission she had accepted upon coming to the earth, and of having scrupulously accomplished her duties as a wife and mother. Also, because during her life she had avoided any resentments towards those who offended her and those who had repaid her with ungratefulness. So 2 more important virtues, dear friends. Forgiveness, not holding on to wrongs that have been committed to us, not holding on to resentments, because ultimately resentments also get us sick. It is thought patterns that will have an impact on our own perispirit and ultimately physical form. And she did not get hooked into ungratefulness. She knew she was working and living for God and not to please other people. She always repaid evil with good and left life forgiving everyone in order to hand herself over to the goodness and justice of God. So she repaid good and evil. So she lived by the virtues, by the beatitudes that Jesus gifted us with in this lifetime. She turned the other cheek. She returned good for evil. So now, 3 days after her passing, she gets evoked. And she says, "I did not experience any state of confusion, And I want to add, dear friends, 3 days after her death, her passing, is very quickly, which means she did not experience a prolonged state of confusion. It was very brief, because she was already lucid and capable of transmitting ideas and concepts 3 days after her passing, which of course is to her own merit because of the life she lived. So she said she didn't experience any state of confusion. Only those who are terrified and surrounded by the constricting darkness of fear become confused. And when do we become fearful? We become fearful when we're not educated, when we don't know what to expect. So that leads us back to the original statement, which we already learned from Alan Kardec in Heaven and Hell, and the previous Happy Spirits, that education is very important for us. Because when we know what to expect, we don't need to be fearful, correct? So then she continues to say, "It has been only 3 days since I passed away, and I already feel like an artist. My aspirations concerning the ideal of beauty in art were the intuition of faculties that I had studied and acquired in other existences, and which I developed during my last one." So we're reminded she was a miniature artist, and 3 days after her passing, she already sees herself as an artist, and she realizes that this is something she had acquired during previous lifetimes. She had practiced to be an artist for several lifetimes before the last one, when she became a miniature artist. And she says, "My aspirations concerning the ideal of beauty in art were the intuition of faculties she had already built up." So when we hear the words beauty in art, we're of course reminded of the beautiful book that Fred Gouveia is bringing to us on Kardec Radio, which is Spiritism in the Arts. Warmly recommend this book, and it helps to listen to the beautiful presentations every Tuesday night. I think it's 6:30 p.m. That's actually Pacific Standard Time. I think it's 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Kardec Radio. So we're looking at Chapter 1, Architecture and Painting. And here we learn in the first sentence, this is by Leon Denis, beauty is one of the divine attributes. God has put in all beings and things this mysterious charm, which attracts us, seduces us, captivates us. So God put beauty in everything. One of the most important things for God in creating the universe was beauty. So then he continues to say, art is the search, the study, the manifestation of that eternal beauty, of which we perceive only a reflection here below. So the type of art we are experiencing here on earth is a pale comparison to the beauty in the arts that is being experienced on the other side. And the higher the worlds, the more beautiful the art becomes, the more divine, the closer to God. But here we see that art is the search, the study, and the manifestation of that eternal beauty. So everyone who is an artist is producing art, and it's not just in paintings, music, it's through speech, it's theater, it's, we all know there's many manifestations of art, but it is any manifestation of art that searches for this divine beauty that God put the seed in us and in the whole universe. Then he continues to say, the essential purpose of art, as we have said, is the quest for and realization of beauty. So he says it in a different way again. It is at the same time the search for God. So by producing art, we're searching for beauty and God. Since God is the first source and the perfect realization of physical and moral beauty, the more refined, fine-tuned, and elevated intelligence becomes, the more it is imbued with the idea of beauty. So the more we become refined, the more we develop, the more we become imbued with the idea of beauty. The essential objective of evolution will therefore be the search for and conquest of beauty. Isn't that interesting, dear friends? It's a whole new aspect that we may not even have thought about, right? I didn't before I came across this book. It opened up new dimensions for me. So the essential objective of evolution is this conquest of beauty in order to realize it in ourselves and in our works. Such is the rule of the soul in its infinite ascension. Then he says, the necessity of successive existences as a means of acquisition, an ever more precise sense of good and beauty. So it is through the many lifetimes that we live, we acquire more and more due to our moral refinement and intellectual refinement. More and more we acquire this means, this desire, the quest for beauty. We manifest it more and more. And this manifestation for beauty, which is expressed in art, is a search for God. So he also says, so little by little, as the soul reaches new stages, the spirit acquires the dignity of an artist. So as we perfect ourselves more and more, we eventually become artists. And then after we've been artists for a while, then we reach the privilege of genius. So geniuses are even further developed than artists. Of course, they're artistic geniuses, but the genius, in whatever manifestation, is a highly developed soul. Otherwise, it wouldn't be able to manifest that beauty in the arts. And that is due to reincarnation through many lifetimes, the perfecting process. So I hope, dear friends, that helped a little bit understand what we're learning here from Mrs. Foulon, who says, my aspirations concerning the ideal of beauty in art were the intuitional faculties that I had studied and acquired in other existences. So it was her intuition, she knew already. So she had already reached the stage of an artist in her quest for beauty, which is the quest for God. So now let us continue. She continues to address now Mrs. Kardec, not Mr. Kardec, not Alan Kardec, but Mrs. Kardec, who was a friend of hers. And she says, "Dear friend, Mrs. Kardec, why are you so distraught over my death? Especially knowing what you know about the disappointments and bitterness of my life, you should instead be joyful in seeing that I no longer have to drink from the bitter cup of earthly sorrows that I had to drain to the dregs. You should believe that the dead are happier than the living. To mourn them would be to doubt the truth of Spiritism. You will see me again." So, dear friends, this is a lesson for us too. So we can substitute Mrs. Kardec with ourselves and see that and learn and remind ourselves that there is no need to mourn. This is, of course, a lofty goal. I understand fully. But it is nevertheless something we can strive for, because if we really understand what the good spirits via Spiritism and what Allan Kardec brought to us through the codification, we know that the true life for the spirits is the spirit life. So, as she says, her life is finished. All of our lives include some suffering, and why wouldn't we be relieved to find a new existence that hopefully reflects the goodness of our life? So we're invited to see death and transitions in a new eye, in a new light. So then she continues to say, "So my good friend, Mrs. Kardec, be indulgent and charitable, sentiments that we all mutually need, whether in the visible world or invisible one. By living according to this motto, everything will turn out well." Wow, dear friends, is that a consoling message or what? Are we feeling better now? We are being consoled with the fact that a clear path is being shown to us. And the clear path is be indulgent, charitable, and indulgent and charitable. And charitable and indulgent. And we know that actually, due to the definition the good spirits give us in the Spirits book, indulgence, benevolence, and forgiveness are the definition of charity. So if we just abide by that, if we follow the golden rule, we are in good hands. She's telling us everything will turn out well. That is a happy spirit giving us a happy message. Right, friends? So, let us skip over some parts of her stories and invocations are pretty long. So we don't want to, let me see whether there are any more messages. All right, no. Okay, friends. Yeah, let us continue. So 3 days later, Mrs. Foulon gets invoked again. This time we're on page 278 in Heaven and Hell. And the following question is given to her. Would you mind describing to us your passage, your awakening, and your first impressions? So this is a question for Mrs. Foulon. And she says, indeed, I did suffer, but my spirit was stronger than the physical suffering which the disengagement made it endure. After my last breath, I passed through a sort of unconsciousness. The word is syncope, which is loss of consciousness. So after my last breath, I became unconscious. And I couldn't perceive anything, she says. She was in a vague somnolence, which is an excessive feeling of sleepiness. I remained like that for quite some time. Now, quite some time, we know she was evoked 3 days after her passing. So it could have been only hours, right? So quite some time, we can kind of quantify it a little bit more. But she felt unconscious, extremely fatigued for several hours. After that, as if I were emerging from a long fainting spell, I awoke little by little and found I was surrounded by friends whom I did not recognize. They lavished care and attention on me. This is something, friends, that we've learned from every single happy spirit so far, that we're never alone. When we awaken on the other side, we're always surrounded by either friendly spirits or spirits we know, family members. We're not alone. And these spirits, as long as we're happy spirits, so far have all been benevolent and kind and supportive. So the same happened to Mrs. Foulon. So she was lavished with care from these spirits that she did not recognize. They showed me a point in space that resembled a shining star. Now this is interesting. Now let's listen. This is new. We haven't heard this before from any other spirit that we've looked at. So these spirits she didn't recognize, and they showed her a shining star far away. They pointed at that, and they told her, "You're going there with us. For you no longer belong to the earth," friends. She's being told that she no longer belongs to the earth. Now what does that mean? Then I remembered I was aided by them as we formed a graceful group rushing towards realms unknown. With the certainty of finding happiness, we rose, and the star grew bigger and bigger in front of us. It was a happy world, a higher world. So friends, Mrs. Foulon was allowed to leave Earth. She did not need to reincarnate on Earth. Now that's a new situation that we need to look at a little bit deeper, correct? So she was shown the path to a higher world. Now let us look. Let us pause and examine that a little bit more. So All right, so first we're going to go to the Spirit's book. Let me find it. And we're going to question 132. We're looking at the purpose, 132, the purpose of incarnation. What is the purpose of the incarnation of spirits? I'm sure you know the answer, right? But we're going to look at it anyway. God imposes incarnation for the purpose of leading spirits to perfection. For some, it is an expiation. For others, a mission. So most of us are here to expiate past wrongs. But we're here because we're perfecting ourselves with the goal, with our next goal, to not have to come back to Earth, but graduate to the next level planet. So now let us look at the classifications of the different planets. We know that all the planets in the universe are inhabited. The good spirits told us that. And that there is approximately 5 categories of planets in the world. That doesn't mean there are 5 planets. There's 5 different consciousness levels, 5 different categories of planets. There is the primitive worlds, which is 1, which are worlds that are even more primitive than planet Earth, which could be compared approximately to the Stone Age of that happened here on planet Earth. Then the second category is the worlds of atonement and trials. Now that is where ignorance and pain still dominate. That is planet Earth. That's where we find ourselves. So we are in a world of atonement where ignorance and pain dominate. And we know that we predominantly learn through pain on our consciousness level. The next level planets, worlds, is the regenerative worlds. And that is where good and understanding for each other already dominate. And that is probably where Mrs. Foulon graduated to. And then the fourth category is the happy worlds. In the happy worlds, ignorance barely exists. And people live in harmony and for the common good. And then lastly, we have the divine worlds, the fifth category. That is where the purified spirits live. So our next goal is hopefully to graduate from Mother Earth, so that we are granted permission to go to the next level world, which will be the world of regeneration. And that is what Mrs. Foulon was gifted with. Now let us continue to look at the Spirit's book. We're going to question 172. 172, question 172, which is incarnation on different worlds. There is a whole chapter that we can read and educate ourselves further. 172 reads, are all of our different corporeal existences lived on Earth? So do we always live on Earth? Allan Kardec asks. And I think we already know the answer, right, friends? The answer is no, not all of them. So we don't live all of our existences on planet Earth. They may be lived on another world as well. Those on this globe are neither the first nor the last, but they are the most material and the farthest from perfection. So, no, we're not staying on planet Earth. We most likely have not always been here, and we won't stay here. Now, question 173. With each new corporeal existence, does the soul pass from one world to another? Or does it live several times on the same globe? Good question. So now Allan Kardec wonders, do we live many lifetimes on one globe, or is every incarnation on a different globe? Well, let us see what the illuminated spirits tell us. They say, it may live, so the spirit may live many lives on the same world, if he has not evolved sufficiently to go to a more advanced one. And apparently Mrs. Foulon had already advanced sufficiently to be granted graduation. So question 173, we're also doing 174. Is it necessary to live again on the earth? Allan Kardec now wonders, And the answer is, what are we guessing? Is it necessary to live on the earth? No. But if you do not progress, you may go to another world that is no better. Perhaps one that is even worse. Oh boy, that is something we don't want to experience, right, friends? That's why we're here. That's why we're studying. That's why we're practicing the good. Because we don't want to get stuck here. And even less so do we want to slither back to another lower world. And then the last question is there any special advantage in coming back to live on the earth? So is there any special advantage to be reincarnating on earth, to come back to earth? And the answer is no. There is no special advantage unless you come on a mission. In that case, you will progress nonetheless, just like you would on any other world. So most of us are here because we are here on an expiatory mission. I don't want to use the word mission because it gets confusing. We're here for expiation. We're undoing past wrongs. But there are some more higher level, more evolved spirits that choose to come back to planet Earth, and they come here out of their own volition just to be of service. And those are the ones who are here on a mission. So friends, interesting, right? So we don't need to stay on Earth, but we have to stay as long as we have not learned all the lessons that Earth or similar level planets offer to us. So let us see what is next. So now Alan Kardec asks, so you left Earth forever? And the answer by her is, I left it behind. I left behind too many loved ones to have abandoned them forever. I will return in spirit. So on one hand, she doesn't have to come back to Earth because she doesn't have to reincarnate on Earth. But as a spirit now, she can come back and visit and help and teach and educate and make a difference. So she also says, you know good well that no obstacles can oppose the visit of spirits from worlds that are superior to Earth. Okay, friends, let's pause. So we learned something else, that there is no obstacle that can prevent a higher spirit to go to worlds that are lower. So spirits of higher order can always visit lower order worlds. Now, let us for a moment go back to the Spirits book, and because we want to flesh that out a little bit, because that's a very interesting statement. So there is a chapter where we learn that good spirits go everywhere, and that is question 279. 279 in the Spirits book, which is Relationships Beyond the Grave. It is part of chapter 6. And question 279, Alan Kardec is wondering, do all spirits have mutual access to one another? Do we all have access to one another, all spirits? And the answer is, the good ones go everywhere. So the more evolved ones can go everywhere. It must be this way in order to bring their influence to bear upon the bad ones. So as a good spirit, more evolved spirits, we have freedom to travel. And then we go to question 459. 459, which is now in chapter 9. And that is the concealed influence of spirits on our thoughts and actions. Because we know that we are surrounded always by a multitude of spirits. And the spirits that surround us reflect where we live our lives, where our mental emanations are. As we think, we emit, and we attract. So here Alan Kardec is now wondering, do spirits have any influence on our thoughts and actions? And this is an interesting question because we just learned that the good spirits can go anywhere, because that way, and it must be so, because otherwise they couldn't influence people of lower order, spirits of lower order. Because as they are more evolved, they will have a good influence on the lower order spirits and incarnates as well, right? Particularly incarnates. So here it is now, do spirits have any influence on our thoughts and actions? Now we wonder, Do spirits actually have an influence on us? And the answer is, their influence on you in this regard is greater than you suppose. For very frequently, it is they who guide you. So we're grateful that the good spirits surround us to guide us. Right, friends? We need that to be connected, to know, to stay on the straight and narrow, to do the good. And then, lastly, we go to question 514 in the Spirit's book, 514. And the question is, are familiar spirits the same as sympathetic spirits? Well, in that question, we learned that there are several categories of spirits surrounding us. There are the protective spirits, there are guardian angels or good spirits. They're on a mission, they follow human beings in their lives, and they help and support them. And then we have the familiar spirits. They link themselves to certain persons by means of varying different ties and duration in order to help them according to their power, which is frequently more limited. So we have the protective spirits. They're higher order spirits that are here to help us. We have the familiar spirits. They are not as high in their order, but they're also surrounding us to help us. They're often family members. And then we have the sympathetic spirits. Those are the ones whom we attract through our individual affections. And they usually resemble our tastes and sentiments. So those are the three levels of good spirits that surround us. Of course, then there's other categories of the spirits that are not so positive. So Mrs. Foulon falls into these categories of a higher spirit who wants to dedicate her life after life to the support of spirits on earth, incarnates on earth. So now we continue. She says that she teaches us that love draws souls together. That's the law of attraction, right? It is love that reigns in the universe. And she also says charity and love are the two drives behind a powerful attraction. Love and charity. There is distance for physical bodies only, but not for spirits. So spirits don't experience distance. So we're going to go forward to page 284, because the two last lessons we learned, which is the one that we don't have to come back to planet Earth, which Mrs. Foulon didn't because she graduated from it and she's now a higher level spirit on a higher world, and the fact that higher level spirits have no obstacles, they can travel anywhere. The reverse isn't true. Lower level spirits cannot go to higher worlds. We know that from No Solar, where André Louis' mother, he could not go and visit her because she was already in a higher world. But at some point she came to visit him. She had the liberty, he could not. That's just one example. And here in Heaven and Hell on page 284, in a finer print, we have these two lessons summarized, and I want to read that to you because it's really important that we take those to heart. So the first one was that graduating from planet Earth. The first lesson is the fact that this example shows us the possibility that it might not be necessary to reincarnate on the earth, but that we may instead pass from it to a higher world without becoming separated from the loved ones we have left behind. So we can graduate and yet stay connected. So we don't have to be scared, because now we're higher level spirits, we can travel. So we can stay connected to our loved ones on the earth. Thus, those who fear reincarnation because of the difficulties of life here on earth can avoid such fear by working hard to improve themselves. Thank you, Allan Kardec, for giving us this incredibly important hint that it's all in our own power. If we work hard and we follow God's laws and we follow these lessons that these good spirits, these happy spirits give us, we will succeed as well. It depends how hard we want to work. And the second one was that higher level spirits can visit everywhere. There's no obstacles. She says the second point is the confirmation of the principle that after death, we're less separated from our loved ones than during life. And here he tells us why. Why are we less separated from our loved ones after death than before? Here's the example. Because Mrs. Foulon, who by old age and illness was confined to a tiny town in the south of France, had only a part of her family nearby. We know that, right? Particularly us who have left our home country, and we may have all our relatives far, far away who we don't get to see, right? And some of us suffer from that. We're sad. But here she experienced the same thing. Most of her children and friends were scattered far away, just like most of us, correct? And then she says she had barely departed her body before she could lightly run, beautiful, to be with any of them. So she had just departed her body and she was already able to visit her family, her loved ones. She'd run to be with them, overcoming distances without fatigue and at the speed of light. Isn't that a positive view, dear friends? So there is no separation anymore once we've transitioned. Another thing to not be worried about. So we can forget about that. As a matter of fact, we will feel closer. We have the ability to be closer to loved ones. And that is such a consoling idea, Ellen Carter said. And it is true, isn't it? So now, as the last, we still have a few things to do here. Well, we'll see. We can keep it short. But actually, maybe we'll do it next time. Because we are running out of time. We have the gospel according to Spiritism. We have the gospel at home following. I'm going to just do 10 more minutes. We'll see how far we get, and then we wrap up the rest next time, friends. So she now gets evoked another day, a few days later, and this time she addresses her children. And the interesting thing is that, of course, we are her children in this moment because we're learning from her. We want to get her advice because she's done something right. She graduated from Earth. So she says to her children, think of your use of time. God has granted you on the earth time. So let us go. We're reminded of Jesus in the home. Chapter 22, page 87, friends. So, what a wonderful book. If you don't have it, we highly recommend it. It has so many wonderful lessons in it that help us further to do the work. And it's called The Divine Talisman. It's chapter 22, The Divine Talisman. And here, Jesus is asked, do you have any special gifts? Because we would like to carry a talisman. We would like to be as powerful as you are. And he says, let us see, how can we summarize it? He says, in fact, I do know of a talisman that has wondrous powers. And he says, by taking advantage of this talisman and its miraculous resources, one can begin acquiring all of the blessings of our Father. And he says, this talisman unveils understanding. It helps us with understanding art and science. It helps us with meditating. It resolves conflicts on the earth. It gives happiness. This talisman gives us peace. It enhances our lives. It helps us with the communication with other spirits. And he says, without this divine talisman, it is impossible to start any work of light and peace on earth. So without this talisman, and we know what it is, right, friends? It's impossible to start any work of light and peace on earth. And then he said, this blessed talisman is something we all have. And I was pondering that earlier this afternoon as I was preparing tonight. And I felt so grateful all of a sudden that all of us, that I was born with so much time. So far, almost 58 years of time were given to me. And it's only up to us to decide what we do with this time. But it is the divine talisman that gets us on the right path. He says, time is the divine talisman that we should avail ourselves of. And here is our dear Mrs. Foulon, who tells her children, namely us, to make good use of our time. She knew, she was wise. She knew that it is up to us to do the good as much as we possibly can with all the resources we have, as Emmanuel helps us to understand. Right, friends? So then she tells her children, us, pray at all times. Prayer will strengthen you. So let us look at prayer for a moment. So we know how important prayer is. It is in the law of worship in the Spirit's book. Question 659. Question 659. Law of worship, which is the first law, divine law, that is being one of the first that is being looked at in the Spirit's book. And here Alan Kardec asks, what is the general character of prayer? Prayer is an act of worship, he says. Praying to God is thinking of God, drawing nearer to God, putting oneself in communication with God. Through prayer, we may do three things: praise, ask, and thank. So this is important. Through prayer, we connect ourselves with God. It helps us to align our will with God's will. It helps us with the resignation, the surrender of our hearts to the hardships we have, may, or will experience. And the three aspects of prayer is the glorification of God. It is giving thanks to God. And it is making a request. And it's in the Gospel, chapter 27, in the chapter that's called Ask and You Shall Receive, where we learn that we ought to not ask for the $1 million or the extra car or for a bigger house. No, the wiser requests that we could make that actually helps us with our evolution, because it is a request for an eternal peace for our soul. It nourishes our soul, is to ask for our moral improvement, to ask for patience, resignation, faith, and courage. So those are the questions, the requests we ought to focus on. And we also know and learn in the gospel that we should pray always from the heart and without ostentation. So we're not standing and advertising our prayers, but we have them come from our hearts. So dear friends, actually we did it. We pulled it through. We learned a lot of lessons. And I hope what we will do next Sunday, when we do the next case, we will summarize Mrs. Foulon, because she definitely has given us some very important lessons. And we're feeling consoled and peaceful, because we know the power lies in our own hands, in our own wills, our own minds, to do the good. And in closing, we would like to extend a brief prayer by connecting with God, our beloved Mother, Father God, first cause of all things, who is always there to help us, via Jesus, via all the good spirits, the evolved spirits, the healing doctors, our own angel, guardian angels, our mentors, our familiar spirits, our protector spirits. And we're thanking you from the bottom of our hearts for your guidance, for your patience, for your love, for your indulgence and benevolence and forgiveness for us and for our offenses. And we're asking for further encouragement in the week to come, to take these lessons by Mrs. Foulon to our hearts and practice them and incorporate them into our lives with increased fervor. And with this and so much gratitude in our hearts, we humbly and kindly ask for permission to close tonight's study session. And so be it. Dear friends, Thank you so much. Let me just see. Are there any? Lappy Wolf. Hello, Lappy. Thank you for joining. Thank you for learning with me, with us. And we will see you next week, same time, same place. God bless you. Good night.